Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where it's an absolutely wonderful morning here at the park. As you can see from the clip, it's quite beautiful here. It's nice and warm for a change. We have beautiful autumn leaves coming out. Not so busy yet. We expect the park later today to get really crowded, as it often does on beautiful weekends in the autumn. The park is getting ready for the winter season. They're putting up the ice skating rink on the other side of the trees over there. And then further toward the other end of the park, they're setting up the Christmas lights displays. Japan, of course, is not a Christian country, but the Christmas holiday season has caught on and becomes a little bit more popular here every year. It's normally something of what they call a singles or a couples holiday, whatever it is, a time where people go out on dates and things like that. But now it's getting to be maybe a little bit similar to the Western commercialized kind of Christmas, where people hand out presents on Christmas Day and such. But anyway, they are getting ready for that, and hopefully we should have everything up and running by sometime next week. It might take longer for the skating, because they have to wait for it to get cold enough for the for the skating rink to freeze. But we're looking forward to having a nice winter here. The subject of today's video is going to be a really cool camera, and one which I used to deal in quite a bit, but I haven't had one of these in quite a while. This camera is the Pentax 67 medium format SLR camera. For those of you who are new to my channel, I sell vintage Japanese cameras and sometimes non-Japanese cameras in my online store, japanvintagecamera.com. I have an Etsy store which is also called Japan Vintage Camera, and this camera right now is listed for sale in my japanvintagecamera.com store, so if you're interested, please check it out. So, the Pentax 67 is a really cool camera which was produced for a really long time, and there were a few different variations along the way. It's kind of a very large version of the early Pentax 35mm SLR cameras. It shares the body design, something like the winding lever and film counter, and the basic overall shape is the early cameras like the Pentax AP, K, or Spotmatic, but with quite a few professional improvements, such as interchangeable prism and later versions which have the mirror lockup on them. These cameras were very popular with shooting professionals for a number of years. A couple of generations of photographers used them, and even to this day they still remain popular with a lot of pros. And from time to time, as I'm walking around here in Tokyo, I'll see photographers working on different projects. Photography is really popular, and magazines are still very popular here in Japan, print magazines that is. And a lot of these photographers still carry these cameras, so quite interesting that they have such a long service life. But then they were designed to be professional quality cameras, and they seem to last pretty much forever. And I guess, they really wonderful design and manufacturing in these. The early versions are kind of easy to spot because they have kind of an older style script on them, which was kind of embossed metal on the front of the prism. The later versions have this white paint on the front, Pentax 67. The earliest versions often don't have the mirror lockup. The later versions do. Otherwise, they are pretty much the same camera, and they all use the same kind of lens, and a lot of the other parts are interchangeable, like the prisms and such. Like I can easily put this prism on a first generation Pentax 67 and it will work fine. So, first I'll talk a little bit about the lenses. What really makes this camera interesting is the quality of the lenses which were made for it. The widest lens was a fisheye lens, which is a little bit pricey today, but not so bad. Then there were a few different wide-angle lenses, 45mm, 55mm, 75mm, which is closer to a normal lens. Then there was the 90mm lens, and this is an example of the 90mm lens. A 90mm, leaf shutter lens, which had a shutter built in to the lens. So if you had a non-mirror lockup camera, you could use the lens shutter inside the lens and not get any vibration whatsoever. Then there was the 105mm Takumar lens, which is a real favorite with a lot of people. It's a really wonderful portrait lens. And we have things like the macro lenses, I think 150mm if I remember right, 200mm, and even 300mm telephoto lenses. So a large variety of lenses were made for these cameras, which made them very flexible for a lot of different uses. One big improvement that these cameras have over the earlier SLR cameras is the electronically controlled shutter. And for a lot of the old schoolers, they weren't really a big fan of electronically controlled shutters because if your battery died and you couldn't find a replacement, then you really couldn't operate the camera. But on the other hand, the shutter accuracy is really wonderful. And on one of these Pentax 67s, if you are firing at a particular shutter speed, that's the shutter speed you're going to get. Mechanical shutter speeds, especially as you get down toward the slower ones, they can kind of lose their accuracy over time. And it's a little bit difficult to adjust them to get them back within spec, whereas the electronically controlled shutters are pretty much dead on all the time. Let's go ahead and take a look at the features, controls, and functions of the Pentax 67, starting at the top side here. I'm going to start with this grip here on the left, which is an accessory grip. This is an additional accessory which was available for these cameras, and it allows you to mount a flash gun on here. And to the side here, maybe you can see where my fingers are pointing, we have a couple of different sockets for mounting your flash cord you can plug into here. A cool thing about these, like on this one here, we have a couple of clips on the back which allows you to attach a shoulder strap or a wrist strap to let you get a firmer hold on these cameras. Moving along here, we have the shutter speed dial, which is located on the left side here. And this one here, the shutter speed dial, this particular camera has a Ttl Meter Prism on the top. The Ttl Meter Prism is coupled to the shutter speed and the aperture. So when you're looking through the prism, there's kind of a matched needle system which moves up and down. And as you adjust the shutter speed or the aperture, the needle will move up and down. And the goal is to get the meter needle centered on the arrow in the middle, and then you have the correct shutter speed and aperture combination for a correct exposure. Over here we kind of have a little opaque thing which allows light to go inside to allow you to see the reading for the meter. On this side here we have the switch which activates the meter. We have on and off. If you turn the meter on, you just flick it that way and release it, and it turns the meter on. If you forget to turn it off, it will turn off by itself after a little while. If you don't forget to turn it off, just turn it off yourself by pushing that way. On this side here we have the shutter release button, which accepts a standard cable release, and then we have a nice little locking system which locks the shutter and prevents you from accidentally taking a photo. Over here we have the film counter dial, and of course the shutter winding or shutter charging and film winding lever. On the back of the camera here we have the battery check lamp, and there's a light on the top which I can't see because of the arrangement of the prism here, but when you press this, it'll let you check the state of the battery. On the back here we have the viewfinder eyepiece. This one has a rubber cup on it. You can adjust for the different diopters by using diopter adapters which screw into the back. Really nice if you wear glasses. And the good thing about these cameras is that they were so popular that the accessories like diopter eyepieces are still kind of easy to find on eBay and places like that. On this side of the camera we have the release lever which opens the film door. And I have kind of a dummy roll of film loaded into this camera because if these cameras don't have film loaded in them, you can't operate the shutter. The shutter lever will just wind and not do anything. So to operate the shutter, you have to, Pentax used to include a little bit of a key which would depress the counter mechanism, and then you turn the counter here up to a number, and then you can operate the shutter and dry fire it and check the operation of the camera. You might come across one of these cameras and put a battery in it and you can't get it to work unless it has film loaded in it. And you may think the camera's not working. It does. You just have to know how to actuate the film counter or put film in it. These cameras, sometimes the mirror locks up in them, which is an issue. We have a little bit of this button here, which is a mirror release button. So if the mirror locks up due to a dead battery or something like that, sometimes you put a new battery in, it will remain locked up. To unlock it, you have to depress this button while depressing the shutter button, and that will cause the mirror to come back down and the camera will be ready to use again. On the other side of the prism we have these little chrome tabs, and if you press these it allows you to pick up the prism like so. This camera is really nice. This is probably the best Pentax 67 which I've ever seen, and that's saying a lot because I've seen a lot of these. It's amazingly clean. Whoever had this before either didn't use it or used it very little. For the front here we have a The lens controls here, we have a selection between manual and automatic for the aperture operation. You can do it manually or automatically. In front of that we have the aperture ring. Then we have the focusing ring, which is arranged in both feet and in meters. And we have a infrared focus mark here. So if you're using infrared film in these cameras, and on rare occasions I do shoot infrared film, it's a wonderful thing to have. And as I said, this camera has fitted with the 90 f2.8 lens, which is a later model lens, a slight bit wider than the 105mm lens, and probably one of the better choices for all-around photography. For myself, I prefer to shoot a little bit wider angle lenses, especially here in Japan where we have kind of narrow streets and alleys. The wider angle lens allows you to get more out of, I guess, more things inside your image when you are closer to them. For most places though, this lens is entirely adequate. On the bottom of the camera, we have the battery chamber here, and you simply turn this and twist it and pull it out, and you have a 6-volt battery here. 4LR44 or 4SR44 battery. These are still easy to find. I recommend the 4SR44 battery because it works better and longer and doesn't have any fall off as the battery starts to wear down a little bit. Whereas the alkaline batteries tend to just, from the moment you use them, they generate less and less current, and the accuracy of certain functions decreases over time. On either side here we have these little lock latches, and these are for loading the film. When you're loading the film, you have to turn them like so, and then they pull out like this, and this allows you to put in the film, take up spool or roll of film, and then you lock them into place. We have lots of lugs here for mounting a I already mentioned the ones here on the back of the grip for a neck strap. You have them on this side here, so you can carry the camera this way. You have them on this side here, you can carry it this way, or you can carry them across the top, and I suppose you could even carry the camera upside down if that suited you. A really good option on these cameras, which most pro cameras don't have. Loading the film in the camera, I already have my dummy roll of film loaded in here, but I'll go ahead and give you a look at how it's supposed to work. So what you would do is you would take your roll of film and pulling this here and turning it and lifting it up, you would put in your roll of film and then lock it in place, pull your film meter across and feed it into the take-up spool. You have to do the same thing on this side to put in a take-up spool, and then simply wind the film. We have two different arrows here. We have one for 120 film and we have the other for 220 film. So depending on what type of film you have, you simply wind this until the arrows running across the film back line up with either arrow. If you're using different types of film, sometimes you have to set the pressure plate on the back because there are different diameters here and the pressure plate will interfere. You simply push down and move it to one side, push it down and move it to the other side. Close the door and then simply wind the shutter until it's ready to go. Okay, ready to go. So let's see, a couple of other things here. The mirror lockup is something I wanted to go over. The mirror lockup cameras kind of get a premium over the cameras which don't have the mirror lockup, and I don't really see the need for it so much. The mirror lockup is pretty much it's meant to stop blur in the photographs, but mainly in situations which most photographers don't encounter. These cameras were very popular for macro photography or product photography, things like that, and they would use a special finder with the magnified eyepiece, and the shutter speed and combinations, they couldn't have any blur. So the mirror lockup was a really wonderful feature to have for this kind of photography. For general photography, I find it's not really necessary. And if you're using, for example, if you're making really long exposures, say you're shooting say a landscape or a forest or something at a small aperture and a low shutter speed of say 20-30 seconds or longer, the mirror lockup isn't necessary because a couple of small motions aren't really going to show on the image. At the really high speed, you're shooting in daylight at a faster aperture on a faster speed, you're not going to notice any difference. I've operated these cameras in a variety of different conditions without the mirror lockup, and I really haven't had any problem with blur or anything, but I guess it's a good feature for people who really want to use something for really precise photography. For myself, it's not so much necessary. This was the last of the irregular Pentax 67s, which was produced, and this version was replaced by the Pentax 67-2, which was a much more advanced camera and featured automatic control. This particular one is just a simple full manual camera with the match needle system. We have a range of shutter speeds from B in 1 second up to 1/1000th of a second, and pretty much the same thing that what you find on the old SLR cameras, but with the really wonderful medium format. I really can't say enough good about these cameras. An unfortunate thing about these cameras is that they've become very expensive in recent years. 10 years ago, I could get a Pentax 67 eye-level camera with a 105mm lens in working condition for around $100 here in Japan. And nowadays, the lens by itself is worth much more than that. These cameras have really caught on as people have realized how much potential they have. The amazing resolution that you can get with one of these cameras, and the fact that it operates just like a regular SLR camera. If you're used to using a Canon or a Nikon or other SLR camera, it's pretty much the same, it's just bigger and heavier. And in some cases, it's not even really heavier. If you have something like a Nikon D5 with a battery pack and a 24-70 f2.8 lens, you're probably looking at the same, or this camera may be even lighter than that combination. So it is kind of big and bulky, but you know, you have to have a trade-off for the quality of the images. The more detailed, the higher resolution, the more, I guess, dynamic range you want, you kind of have to add a little bit of weight for improvements in each of those things. Anyway, that's it for my review about the Pentax 67 medium format SLR camera. This camera, as I mentioned earlier, is currently listed in my online store. And for those of you who are interested, I also have a Pentax 67-2 available, and I hope to be doing a review about that camera to kind of describe the differences between the two, and hopefully I'll have that ready in a couple of days. Over the next week, I'm going to be, or 2 weeks, I'm going to be adding a lot more cameras to my online stores. I have a new source for cameras, which is quite good and will allow me to increase the variety and quality of the cameras which I have available. So if you're interested, please check back. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.